economic potential, the Honourable Sophia Mormont.
Thank you, President. I apologise for my enthusiasm initially. Today I move without notice that the WA Government embrace the hemp industry and its stakeholders, ramp up support for the hemp industry to expand and meet production and income targets set by the Federal Government through AgriFutures, assess the feasibility of subsidising hemp processing facilities and incentivising wholesale buyers in the construction industry to use hempcrete as a building material, and study the recommendations of the AgriFutures research, development and economic plan for industrial hemp with a view to taking steps to support the implementation of these recommendations as feasible.
Is that the motion be agreed? The Honourable Sophia Mormont.
Thank you, President. Noting that industrial hemp is an emerging industry that is gaining increasing attention in Australian agriculture as well as internationally, because it has the potential to address several challenges facing the WA economy and global economies as well. Recent research by AgriFutures shows clear steps required to expand the industry. Something that I was delighted to see has been recognised by the government in their response to the Select Committee, in particular to ensure that legislation regulating the hemp industry is fit for purpose, removing obstacles, making it easier for people to enter the business, plus financial support for this burgeoning industry. So no doubt you're rolling your eyes that I'm going to speak about hemp again, but this is my opportunity. You're not? Oh, that's really good to see. Excellent. I'm excited. Great. Wonderful. Look, I have to say that this opportunity is, my chance for a half-hour infomercial on hemp here, and you are a captive audience, which is fantastic. Some of you may be surprised to learn that there are quite a few hemp businesses in WA already, and they are producing products from everything from skincare, food products, seed products, hemp oil, building materials. Unfortunately, no clothing as yet, mainly because we simply don't have the facilities to do that here, to process the fibre. So most of the fibre products, the clothing products, are coming from India and China at the moment. So whilst Legalised Cannabis WA is a single-issue party, the Federal Party was known initially as the Hemp Party, which stood for Help End Marijuana Prohibition. And hemp was part of that platform. So support for single-issue parties is growing, as we saw at the recent Rockingham by-election. A third of all the votes went to other parties, not Labor, Liberals or the Nationals, and this was the highest in 20 years. Now, in Victoria and New South Wales, the crossbench in the legislative councils has the balance of power. So hopefully we will achieve that in here after the next election. Now, we champion the hemp industry, not because we are dreamy stoners necessarily who think that a current niche industry is the answer to all the world problems, though, to be honest, secretly, I do believe that. I've been seeing so much information from around the globe showing what the potential of hemp and how it can help with a whole range of environmental problems that we are faced with, and economic problems as well. Current regulations are making it difficult for people to enter the industry, in particular the rules around the THC levels. So cannabis and hemp are the same plant, just one is low THC and the other one isn't. Now, you could smoke a whole field of hemp if you wanted to, and you'd end up with a cough, and that would be about it. So another factor that is inhibiting the growth of hemp here is that growers here are not allowed to extract CBD from the plant. So CBD is the non-psychoactive component, which is becoming increasingly popular as a health supplement. And it would mean create a valuable income stream for farmers that would obviously allow for further investment for them and make their business more economically viable. So recently when I was in the UK, I saw products with like CBD chocolate, which was quite delicious. There are CBD food supplements. We're seeing hemp seeds coming out everywhere as food supplements as well. We're seeing it pop up in things like mueslis. Now, what is really useful about CBD and or the seeds associated with the cannabis plant is that it is one of the few land sources of omega-3s. And omega-3s are great as an anti-inflammatory in particular, and you need it for decent sleep, decent brain function, and good mobility of your joints as well. Now, the hemp industry holds a lot of potential, and loosening some of the regulations, we have the opportunity to become a major player in the global market, and I would love to see that for WA. We have plenty of space, and we have a bunch of incredibly dedicated and enthusiastic entrepreneurs in Western Australia. And whilst the government has provided some support for hemp, we would love to see more. So right now in WA, one of the things that we are facing is the need to diversify our economy. So we are looking at needing to provide different industries in WA, move away from mining at some stage, and acknowledge that the farming industry is going to change in WA as well, especially when you take into account the phasing out of the live sheep trade. Other areas in WA that you could focus on in regards to the environment in particular is that hemp can be very useful in making materials like bioplastics. And these bioplastics would be fully compostable and after use would not need to be sorted into any particular bin. You could put them in your compost bin outside. Now, I know that change can bring with it periods of uncertainty for people, in particular in the farming industry at the moment. But with strong leadership and solid prospects on the horizon, that change can become a lot easier. We can provide security for people at the end of that process of change, which will hopefully buoy their enthusiasm slightly more, and simply make for a happier population overall. This means that we will be going through a period of change, but at good things at the end of that, people tend to be more comfortable with that change as we go along. Now, during a recent sitting, the Liberals and the Nationals told us that we should not have broken up with the native timber industry because it was deemed sustainable, and the Labor Party banned native forest logging for political reasons. The Honourable Jackie Jarvis reminded us that we do need to preserve native forest for ecological reasons, which ultimately affect the economy, in particular rainfall, the water table, biological diversity necessary for pollination, and so on. So this had to change, and hemp can provide an alternative there to wood. It takes a bit of processing. You take the herd of the plant and some of the fibre, and it can get soaked into very low VOC glues and then pressed together in beams or into a type of fibre board that can be used for cabinetry and houses. So basically the technology now is there to make your whole house by the glass and metal bits out of hemp. So that would mean for WA that we need to import less, we would be more economically independent and would need to rely less on products coming from over east in particular. So it is As Paul Kelly sang, from little things, big things grow. If we want to achieve economic transformation and diversification to meet important goals for the present and future, such as creating a sustainable economy that is prosperous, humane, and environmentally friendly, we're going to have to support some of these little things in the hope that they will grow bigger. Now, I am fairly certain that hemp has that potential and can certainly help with creating a very large industry here. I was pleased to hear that the government has extensive programs around supporting economic diversification based on the Diversify WA framework, including boosting primary industry through trade through the provision of $17 million for value-added investment business grants, as well as the Asia Access Business Grants and other initiatives. I only ask that the government consider taking the hemp industry more seriously in their plans for economic diversification and transformation to achieve a more sustainable and humane economy. So hemp can be used to make a variety of commercial and industrial products, including rope, which when we look at the old sailing ships, the rope and sails were made from hemp, and they were mildew resistant and very, very strong. We see textiles, clothing. We're starting to see shoes, hemp shoes being produced as well, including the upper and the sole that can be made with that, and they last very long. Paper is another product that can be made from hemp, and I actually have hemp paper business cards now, which are obviously compostable, and they have natural dyes on them. Insulation is another component that can be made with hemp, in particular the fibre. It is referred to as hemp wool, and I have heard here from people in the industry that have been trying to get that off the ground that the insulation industry feels that we are ahead of our time with that idea. But the benefits of hemp wool are that it is, once again, mildew resistant, and it's natural, compostable in the end, and has great thermal properties as well. Now, hemp can also be used for biofuel, in particular biodiesel, so that would mean that we could grow our hemp and have less of a reliance on oil as a whole, and also with the bioplastics, that would mean less of a reliance on oil as well. Now, I realise it will need some adjustment. It is not exactly the same as some of the products that we are relying on now, but the technology is definitely catching up and making that more accessible for industries. Currently, hemp has wide applications in the construction sector. Globally, 8% of carbon emissions come from cement, but hempcrete, which is a mixture of hemp and lime, sequesters carbon throughout its life cycle, including after it has been used to build a house. Now, native timber here was central to supply chains for structural timber in the construction industry, but softwood plantation industry does not easily replace this. So hemp wood can replace that. In the Netherlands, that is quite popular. They are quite far with that, and they are starting to build more and more houses out of hemp, hempcrete and hemp wood there, and the government is very supportive of that. There's also a project being started, and I can't remember the country, but it was in Africa, I think, where hempcrete is being used for social housing in particular. And it was quite a large order for social housing. I think they were looking at 100,000 houses made out of hemp. And they were small, but effective, providing homes for people. Interestingly enough, hemp wood is 20% stronger than oak. Now, I couldn't find the data on that with Jarrah, so I'm not quite sure how the two compare. But obviously, oak is the primary wood used in Europe for construction, and it is seen as one of the strongest woods available. What I was disappointed to find out about the hempcrete industry in WA is that large retailers of building materials are being told not to stock hempcrete, and that if they do stock that, they will get a reduced discount on some of the products from these other companies. I don't believe it is the place of a company to reduce choices for the consumer by blackmailing retailers. I think that is something that is really quite wrong with our society. Consumers should have that choice. People are making those choices, and it should be so normal to go to your local hardware store or a building supplier, walk in there and be able to make that choice for hempcrete. And retailers should not be made to suffer economically for that. So in regards to plastics and our plan for phasing out plastics, obviously it has hemp has a high cellulose content, and that will make it really suitable for all plastics and packaging. So it would be great, and I suspect that will happen in the 10 years going forward, that a lot of plastics that we see in our retail chains will be replaced with bioplastics. And I think hemp, because it's such a fast-growing plant, can play a major role in that. Now, when you look at common plastics that we are still dealing with in the environment right now, it is not just the fact that they come from oil or that they are that they give problems in breaking down. They also create something called xenoestrogens. Now, xenoestrogens are a toxic compound. They are known as endocrine disruptors, which means that they interfere with your hormonal system. And we're starting to see more symptoms with people having excess estrogen in our society, and you are seeing that in early puberty in girls in particular. They used to get their period at about age 13, 14, and now it's becoming more popular or more common to see girls 8, 9 starting their period. And one of those factors is due to the xenoestrogens that we are having an increase of in our environment due to plastics in particular. We are also seeing an increased cases of infertility in both men and women, and that is also associated with the xenoestrogens that have now become part of our food chain, so they're very hard to avoid. Now, hemp has a fast-growing biomass. It rapidly sequesters carbon at an estimated rate of 22 tonnes per hectare per growing season. So growing hemp has the potential to earn income from farmers through the Australian Carbon Credit Scheme, formerly known as the Emissions Reduction Fund. Until the current time, it has been very data intensive for farmers to demonstrate carbon sequestration through the program, but this should become easier in the future, enabling hemp farmers to earn a diversified income source. Now, hemp stalks can also be burned to make biochar, a material for products that use solid forms of carbon from water and air filters to high-tech applications such as batteries and fuel cells. And this can integrate into existing processing infrastructure, unlike construction products and textiles, which will require new supply chains and contracts to be established. So I would just like to close by saying that hemp can offer a good livelihood potential for farmers, that the products that hemp can provide are huge in their range, from food to cloth to building materials to helping improve the environment with reduced xenoestrogens and with carbon credits. So I'll leave it at that for now and give the opportunity to some of my colleagues to speak. Thank you.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Minister for Agriculture and Food.
President, thank you. And I thank the honourable member for bringing this excellent motion to the House. And I am delighted to speak about all the ways that the WA government indeed embraces the hemp industry and its stakeholders and the support that it gives to the sector. I've got so many notes about all of the different things we do. The motion is quite a broad range, and I'm thrilled to say that the WA government is involved in a broad range of ways. So since 2019, the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development has invested over $3.5 million in industrial hemp research, development and industry grants. And that has generated a further $1.5 million of private investment through co-contribution. So we're incredibly thrilled to have been part of this support for emerging industries. The Department of Primary Industries has, for as long as it's been around, more than 100 years, has always embraced the idea that we will support farming communities to trial new crops, to trial new varieties, to look at new things. Some with great success, some with not great success. But the industrial hemp projects within DPIRD have been well thought out and well supported. One of the ones one of the most recent briefings I received was in June 2023 about the industrial hemp projects, demonstration sites that were happening in Western Australia. I've got in front of me a media release from the 26th of June 2023, and the title is Industrial Hemp Field Day Demonstrates Crop Potential in the Tropics. So the Department of Primary Industries has been running field trials at its Frank Wise Horticultural Research Station, which is otherwise known as the Kununurra DPIRD site. Those of you who've been around for a few years will know that my predecessor, the Honourable Lanny McTiernan, revitalised that Frank Wise Institute up in Kununurra to actually really make it a hub of horticultural research. So the trial that was being done up at the Frank Wise Institute up there in Kununurra was co-funded by AgriFutures Australia, and the Honourable Sophia Mamon spoke about AgriFutures Australia and their strategic R&D plan. So I can assure you that the West Australian Government is working very closely with AgriFutures. AgriFutures is an organisation obviously very close to my heart. AgriFutures runs the Rural Women's Award, and as a Rural Women's alumni, I have a very close connection to AgriFutures. But more importantly, AgriFutures runs an emerging industries program, and it looks at a range of small and emerging industries that have potential to support agriculture in Australia. AgriFutures is a Commonwealth organisation that receives Commonwealth funding, as well as grower contributions from a number of emerging industries. So they have indeed released their Australian Industrial Hemp Strategic R&D plan from 2022 to 2027. And you will have heard me speak about AgriFutures in this place more recently, because they will be holding the Evoke Ag Conference here in Western Australia, and I have no doubt that industrial hemp will feature very prominently in that Evoke Ag Conference that will be here in Western Australia in February. But I might just quickly go back to the field days that were held earlier this year. So there was 12 varieties being evaluated at the Kununurra site, and it was the second year of a 3-year trial. The researchers acknowledged that there was a potential for hemp in the tropics, and the idea of a field day, for those not involved in agriculture, is field days are a long-standing practice across lots of industries where people who are interested in growing a crop come and see what varieties are available. They come and look at the growing methods, the agronomy around them. So this trial, the one that I'm speaking about in Kununurra, had hemp seed varieties sourced from Australia, France, Canada, China and Poland, and it had selected lines that were particularly suited for a tropical environment. It planted 150 plants per square metre, sowing them in April, May and June. And it was the first year the Kununurra trial results showed that the time of sowing and the variety type significantly affects the yield and plant establishment. And that's the whole point of DPIRD, as probably some of the most skilled agricultural scientists in the state do these trials so that they can then inform growers. These are the varieties that work. This is when you should sow this crop. This is the yield you can expect. So the second year crop was nearing maturity, as I said, in June. It was currently standing at between 0.6 of a metre to 1.9 metres high, and it was ready to be harvested in late July, depending on the maturity. Now, that trial in northern Western Australia was complemented by trials at the DPIRD site in Manjimup. And if anyone's been to the DPIRD site in Manjimup, again, a fantastic research station. It is, of course, where we've developed the Bravo apple and the Pink Lady apple, so it's famous for developing apples, but perhaps soon to be famous for developing hemp. So the hemp trial was evaluating 11 varieties, and these were sown at different intervals because obviously we're talking about that southern food hub of the state. So this is where we had 11 varieties sown in November and harvested in February and March. So the AgriFutures have acknowledged that DPIRD's help and support has allowed them to consider how hemp crops grow both in tropical and, of course, in our southern food bowl area. It's I just want to read a quote here. So this is a quote from Senior Project Manager, Dr. Olivia Reynolds from AgriFutures Australia. She said, the outcome of the industrial hemp variety trial, done by DPIRD, will help position Australia's agricultural industry to take advantage of the opportunity to produce an environmentally sustainable multi-purpose crop, Dr. Reynolds said. With the global industrial hemp market projected to reach $1.8 billion by 2027, Dr. Reynolds said industrial hemp provided diverse opportunities for Australian agriculture. She goes on, industrial hemp is extremely versatile and can be used for everything from food to fibre, even fence posts. And I think anyone who's sat in this chamber has heard from our colleagues on the crossbench the amazing versatility of this fibre. So, as I said, there was actually, following up from these trials in Kununurra and Manjimup, there was the field day, of course, in Kununurra, but there was also a crop production field day held in Bunbury in June earlier this year, again, just to highlight to people who may be wishing to grow this crop of the great versatility. Industrial hemp is, of course, regulated here in Western Australia, and we are doing our best to ensure that we can actually make that regulatory system as smooth as possible. Now, I also had the pleasure of serving on the Select Committee into Cannabis and Hemp. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay until the end, but we certainly, together with the Honourable Dr Brian Walker and my colleague Matthew Swinburne and Lorna Harper, got the opportunity to see many industrial hemp facilities. We saw hemp growing in the field, we saw hemp being processed. It was a fantastic learning opportunity, and we got to visit lots of facilities. Now, the Select Committee made a number of recommendations, and I think it was last week I was able to stand here and table a response to those recommendations. So I won't go too far into it, but I do just want to speak about some of those recommendations. So recommendation 14 from the Select Committee into Cannabis and Hemp was that the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, DPIRD, conduct a review of the Industrial Hemp Act to ensure the legislation is fit for purpose and does not impose unjustified restrictions on the industry, taking into account the limited opportunity for industrial hemp to be misused or redirected. And I'm pleased that the government response notes that this recommendation is certainly supported in principle. So in response to industry demand and encouraging research findings, the WA government chose to give agricultural and industrial sectors an opportunity to grow industrial hemp, and that was created through the Industrial Hemp Act in 2004 and the Industrial Hemp Regulations 2004. So this was to enable growers in Western Australia to grow industrial hemp for industrial uses, and it was designed, to ensure that they could do so without falling foul of any acts that were designed to combat drug abuse. So that act has been working well, but it's currently fit for purpose in that it actually allows people to cultivate, harvest and process industrial hemp. It is recognised, however, in the government response that industry and consumer requirements have progressed since 2004, and a review of the Act and regulations will be considered, taking into account other government legislative priorities. The report identifies some barriers to expansion of industrial hemp, and the WA government acknowledges these barriers and will, look to address them as we can. The DPIRD, Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, has already initiated action in respect to issues that can be dealt with through improved licensing processes, engagement and consultation with industry. And those of us who are on the committee know that DPIRD came and they had quite a rigorous system of licensing, and to their credit, they stepped up pretty much straight away and recognised that some of their processes were a little bit clunky, and it's hard to believe that government agencies sometimes get stuck in bureaucracy, but they acted very quickly to actually address areas where the process of applying for permits and licences was a little bit clunky. So the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development continues to review its industrial hemp policy and licensing arrangements to provide clarity and streamline the process, and that includes a review of testing regime, costs and use of plant parts. And so the findings and recommendations of the report from the Select Committee will be a key consideration to moving this work forward. So I think the process of having the Select Committee, chaired of course by the Honourable Dr Walker, was well worthwhile. Recommendation 15 recommended that DPIRD advocate to the Commonwealth Government to amend the Narcotics Drug Act 1967 and other legislation to remove obstacles to the cultivation and commercial sale of industrial hemp. And again, the recommendation is supported by government. The recommendation appeared to be largely driven by perceived opportunities for the extraction of CBD from the leaves and flowers of industrial hemp. It is understood the Commonwealth is already investigating ways to exempt the cultivation of hemp for CBD in conjunction with other current Commonwealth review of the Narcotics Drug Act. And again, as part of that committee, we certainly got the opportunity to meet with the Therapeutic Goods Administration and actually get a clearer understanding of where they were going in regard to this. And I certainly remember them being quite positive about the opportunities. An exemption for the cultivation of hemp for CBD by the Commonwealth Government would be required for an amendment to the WA legislation. So we are indeed working closely with the Commonwealth, and I'm pleased to say that DPIRD is keeping abreast of any developments and opportunities and will provide input into any proposed exemptions or reviews as the time becomes, as the Commonwealth starts that review process. Recommendation 16 from the report was that DPIRD and the WA Government continue to encourage and provide financial support for research into industrial hemp. And the recommendation is, of course, supported. DPIRD continues to collaborate and co-invest, and I've just spoken, of course, about those trials with AgriFutures that not only provide financial support but also agronomic advice. And so we co-invest where there is high impact research that aligns with the strategic need of industry and government. Now, a key focus is to support the growth and profitable and sustainable industries. The number of licences for industrial hemp has dropped slightly in Western Australia in recent years, and this happens with all emerging industries where people get into an industry and then find perhaps it's not for them. It is an emerging industry, and it will take, obviously, industry to step up and support the work that's done by government. But there has been significant investment by government in industrial hemp processing. So I have got just reams and reams of papers of funding that has gone into, these varieties, trials, regional economic development grants, RED grant, November 2018. So these RED grants are the Regional Economic Development Grants. MG Corporation in Kununurra, $47,000 to develop a commercial vision for an East Kimberley industrial hemp. May 2020, Vass Valley Hemp Farm, $50,000, upscaling value-adding hemp food production, purchase of industrial scale seed, storage, cleaning, roasting and packaging equipment for the processing of hemp foods. And I did see the Honourable Pierre Yang talking about the hemp seed he has in his cereal, I think it was. Red Grant Round 3, September 2021, The Dam, an agri-tourism showcase, $53,000, restaurants, cellar door and small goods processing. March 2022, Hemp Squared Manufacturing Expansion Project, $100,000 to support manufacturing expansion for developed building products. And then, of course, there was the separate, so that's the RED grant. So it was a separate industrial hemp grant scheme. In industry food standards, $76,000 contributed to that. Many Peaks crop trial, $37,000. Ridgeview building, $99,000. They go on, and I obviously am running out of time, but there are quite literally pages of support that we've given to industry. Now, all of these economic development grants and research trials, as I said, they do depend on industry also being able to step up and put their own capital into this. Government provide a supporting environment, whether that's through legislation or economic development programs and grants. But it is really important to remember with any emerging industry, we certainly need those commercial operators to come forward. I'm not sure that anyone's advocating that the government should have a government-owned hemp processing facility, although our friends on the crossbench may. But we are absolutely supportive of the sector.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, President. It's a bit odd for a Thursday morning to find myself agreeing with the government, particularly on a Thursday morning, so I'll try to keep that to a minimum. It feels quite unreal. However, we're here to discuss cannabis. Cannabis sativa, which is obviously been around for thousands of years and has been in use for thousands of years. I'm pleased to see that the Legalised Cannabis Party is focused on industrial hemp, but I have to give the government some credit that it has been at least a partial supporter of the hemp industry. We've yet to see probably how much the current Minister for Agriculture is dedicated to it, but the former Minister for Agriculture, the Honourable Alana McTiernan, a former member of this place, was a very long-standing supporter of cannabis sativa and has been known to be so for a very long time. So I will give her some credit. She did put some investment in place in relation to industrial hemp, but took a relatively sensible approach to it, I think. Now, the issue with industrial hemp is that it is an interesting plant. It's a rapidly growing plant that delivers a lot of cellulose. The problem with the industry is that much of what hemp does is repeatable with other species and other plants and other things. Now, and this is specifically for the cultivars that are low THC and low cannabinoid, President. So effectively, if you want to grow for industrial purposes cellulose effectively to put into a whole range of products, you can do that with cannabis sativa, but you can do it with the low THC versions, but you can do it with other plants as well. So the issue comes back to, is this industry the only industry that can deliver the outcomes that are proposed for it? And the answer is generally no. So there are other opportunities. We've had things that said like fence post, for example. Yes, you can grow industrial hemp and you can solidify it and put it into a fence post, or you can grow a tree and put it into a fence post. There are lots of other proponents. So the issue with the industry in the industrial version of hemp is that how does this industry develop to take over some of the roles of other commercial production? And I'm always careful, President, when one thing is designed to be the solution for everything. Like, funnily enough, members might realise I'm something of a cynic. So when somebody comes in that this will solve everything, I generally take a rather cynical approach. The reality is that this industry can do much of the things that other things do. So hemp industry, when you say the hemp industry will develop and be a multi-million-dollar industry and do all these great things, that's true. In some of those circumstances, it will do it at the expense of existing industries. Now, the pine plantation industry is a prime example because it was brought up that oak is a construction timber in Europe, and that's true, mostly out of native forest. The reality is that the main construction timber in Australia is pine. And replacing construction of pine is not a bad idea because the hemp will grow faster and ultimately we have this massive shortfall coming up. So it's not that it's a bad idea, it's that the industry needs to develop and sell itself and market itself. And even the government, even the Labor Party and the former Minister McTiernan, the Honourable Alana McTiernan, with her great support, in my view, probably more than I, in terms of cannabis sativa, it actually has to compete in the marketplace. And what the minister has currently said is critically important. That is, the industry has to develop. I get people come in all the time and say, if the government would just put $1 billion into this industry, my industry would flourish. And it's generally true. So if the government would put $1 billion into industrial hemp, it would probably flourish. No pun intended. But if the government put $1 billion into battery development, that would probably flourish too. So it has to be on a competitive marketplace. The industrial hemp grows well. There's lots of positives about it as a crop. I mean, it grows very big. It's almost a tree when you see it in full height. Mind you, cannabis sativa, whether it's the low THC or the high THC, both develop almost into a tree at its full extent. And all of it could be used in this process. But the industry has to take that resource and produce and market it. And it's not, in my view, the role of government to take the place of development. I've been around long enough to see a number of industries come forward, and certainly this is not the first time we've had debates or discussions around industrial hemp. But what needs to happen is those that are producing industrial hemp have to invest in its future. Because if you believe that this has a future, and it can have a future, there is no doubt that it can have a future. There is a great role for industrial hemp. I wouldn't mind going back to hemp ropes, to be honest, because those plastic imitation things that we use, they kill your hands. So there are good uses for hemp, but the industry needs to step up and, most importantly, develop a marketplace and then put the processing in place to meet that marketplace. So call me reactionary right-wing, President, because it's pretty accurate. I actually believe that the marketplace develops the processing, and then ultimately develops the production at the beginning of the process. Too often we go, if I just produce this, someone should find a marketplace for it, because I can produce lots of this, and it's absolutely true. You could plant out great swathes of Western Australia in industrial hemp. You could produce a great crop, and you could do, it's not complicated. But the marketplace comes first, the processing comes in the middle, and you can't just build it and they will come. So you have to have that marketplace in place first, and the industry has to step up. So I actually don't want to see the government put $1 billion into industrial hemp processing or industrial hemp marketing. I actually think the government, I can't believe I'm saying this on a Thursday morning, but I think the government has done something of a reasonable job in the industrial hemp marketplace. I can't believe those words will be recorded into Hansard, but apparently this won't last all day. But on one issue you can borrow that one. But the reality is that the industry has to develop, and it has to develop marketplace and processing. And the issue has always been processing for industrial hemp. We've had my southwest has had plenty of people grow crops of industrial hemp. The issue has been processing. So what it needs is a major benefactor to come in and invest in that processing component. Now, you might argue that the same thing should ultimately occur with sugar in the Ord, for example, or whatever's happening in the Ord Valley. So, and I won't go into the technical details of why that Ord River development up north is being something of a white elephant. We can all go and watch the Utopia episode and work out what's going on. But the reality is that distortions of the marketplace by government rarely end well. And I shouldn't have to reference things that are happening in the coal industry and power industry to be able to demonstrate that. The reality is that distortions of the marketplace by government are generally not a good thing. But there are lots of things the government do can encourage the development. So they can be supportive of industrial hemp as a product. They can be supportive of the development of processing. They could streamline approvals processes, for example. There's lots of things government can do, some of which they're doing, some of which are recommendations of the committee report put together by the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker. That's all good stuff. That's where the government should be focused. And then industry. If it is going to develop into an industrial hemp industry that takes over some of the roles of other industries, and the obvious easy one is pine. I mean, you want about a distorted marketplace. The pine industry exists in Western Australia because the State Agreement Act's supplying a marketplace, and obviously it all fell over. So distorted marketplaces aren't good. But there has to be a marketplace developed, taking over from other products. I mean, when you talk about biodiesel, and it's absolutely true, it's a good product for biodiesel, but so is lots of other things. It's a good product in construction, but so are lots of other things. There's lots of things about industrial hemp that are good. And I'm just pleased, I'll finish with this, I'm pleased to see that we're moving away from the discussion around high THC cannabis sativa and talking about low THC in industrial hemp, President. This is why. I'll never forget door knocking for the 2005 election in the Cedar Capel. I door knocked a house in Withers, which is tiger country for the Liberal Party. Not as bad as Collie, but still hard. And I met a family whose daughter went out on one night out, on a wild night out, was exposed to obviously high THC cannabis, and her life was destroyed on one night. So as much as people go, alcohol is a bigger problem, I haven't seen anybody get drunk one night and then never be able to function properly and have a full future again. So I will never forget that, and I'm very pleased to see that we're now talking about industrial hemp, which I think has a much better outcome.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Brian Walker.
Thank you, President. I was delighted to hear of this motion, and I was equally delighted to have the wonderful contribution from the Minister Jackie Jarvis, who of course had been on that committee and is probably one of the most experienced people of this the chamber, hopefully apart from myself, in dealing with matters of cannabis and hemp. So I was very pleased to hear about the government response to the hemp industry as such. And credit where credit is due, I think. It's good, it's about time, but we can always say that there's much more which could be done. We must be thankful for this, much more which could be done. I would, however, take just one word which bothered me about the last contribution by my esteemed friend, the Honourable Steve Thomas, when he mentioned that one episode of THC caused a life to be destroyed. That's the first I've heard of that in many years of using this with my patients. I can tell you certainly I've had many, many patients whose lives have been destroyed by one night of alcohol. Many. And the concept that THC on its own, apart from giving 4 hours of a hard time if you're taking too much THC naive, is not going to do a great deal more. Certainly won't send you paranoid for a lifetime. So I would suggest that perhaps we ought to have a chat about the situation and see what else was going on, because when you give cannabis in the hands of criminals, of course, you're going to get things which are not right. We need to have governmental input, I think, for health, to look after our minors, to look after those who are vulnerable. And I appreciate that the government is actually involved in this, and I so give credit, again, where credit is due. The problem I see here is that we're basically dealing with fear, the fear of THC. I'll give you an example of this. If we look at industrial hemp and look at that as a feed crop for cattle, the question then is how much THC is going to be present in the meat? And that's a very valid thing to be concerned about. How much THC is going to be in that meat? Can we then send people high by having a McDonald's hamburger? And the question then is, once you begin to calculate how much of the available THC from industrial hemp, even from high THC hemp, is given to cattle to eat, and then slaughter, and then consume that meat. The question is, and I haven't yet worked it out, because I haven't yet been able to calculate how many cows, whole cows, would I have to eat to get one high? It's not one cow, it's going to be several cows. I don't know how many. So the question that we would then be bothered by having a small amount of THC in meat is absolutely out of this world. I mean, it's not at all something I would be concerned about, but it does point out a problem that we have in dealing with the hemp question, which is fear. And the fear is inhibiting innovation, and it is part of the status quo thinking. Now, I've mentioned this before in this House, that the status quo is what keeps us from innovation. The status quo keeps us thinking about the past. And I was very glad to hear the government response that they're looking differently at hemp for the future, the innovative approaches for hemp. So the excellent research from DPIRD, I'm very glad to hear that. But we also have to look at hemp as an industrial crop, for example, in the Pilbara, where it could be very useful for helping indigenous peoples to grow their own housing. And that would give a whole lot more social responsibility and social success to a people which have been thoroughly deregulated, if you like, thoroughly abused in the past and are struggling to find their way in life. But also, by having an industrial crop, we do actually have the potential for a microclimate change. We do have the potential for turning a miserable topsoil into 1 metre worth of valuable topsoil. These are all things which can be of immense importance to our agriculture in the future. Can you imagine what would happen if you rotated hemp, industrial hemp, with, say, canola or with wheat? What the benefits would be for the farmers, and they would be immense. We'd turn from a 3-bag yield into an 8-bag yield, potentially competing with the eastern states. So we'd have also a wonderful opportunity for revitalising areas of marginal agriculture. And these are things which have to be looked at. The problem is when dealing with hemp is that we're looking here at the fears regarding THC resulting in legislation which has slowed innovation, which has slowed research. And I'm very glad to see the excellent research from DPIRD is ongoing. However, time is also short. We have, right now, we are seeing climate change, the long predicted, long refused to believe climate change, which tells us that no, there is no such thing as climate change. This is natural swings in climate, and now we're seeing the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the droughts coming on board, and people are now beginning to see the reality of climate change. And we have, within our means, we have at least one crop which can be used to help alleviate, at least in certain areas, for example, in southwest of WA, can alleviate microclimate issues to some small degree, but every small step is a step in the right direction. There are barriers to be addressed, of course, but the essential thing is that we need, as politicians, it is our duty, it is incumbent upon us to make things better, to recognise when things are not good and to make improvements, even small but incremental changes which will improve the wellness of our society. So in this we can all agree, I think. The government, the opposition and indeed the crossbench, I'm sure, would agree that this is our aim, this is what we aim to do, this is why we were elected. It wasn't to sit here and talk nonsense, it was to serve the people, and this is what we can do. I think hemp is an important tool in that. Which reminds me that one of the questions about how hemp could be used, we could look at the difference between using hemp and cotton for our fabrics. Cotton, of course, requiring a lot of water, requiring a lot of pollution in managing the freedom from disease, managing the difficulties in growing a crop. Even with high rainfall, hemp could actually replace the need for cotton. It could give us a future with fabrics which are indeed better for us in every way, both for the climate, and for the economy, and also for our environment. So coming back to this, we have two main points I'd bring out from this discussion about hemp, and that is that we need to battle against the concept of fear in our society. Fear has no place in our society. We need to look at things with a cold, clear eye and look for our own good future. And the status quo, which I will mention again and again, is the enemy of progress. And we need, at all levels, in government and outside government, to look at this as an enemy. Thinking about a different way of thinking beyond the status quo, I will quote again the Honourable Minister Jackie Jarvis mentioned the dam, an excellent place in Denmark with a look on life which gives us a fantastic setup, a fantastic organisation, a place for good food, a place for actually cannabinoid-infused alcohol, a place where the environment is being cared for in beautiful circumstances. And I would highly recommend people to consider that as a holiday target, but also we could look at that from our own party political view. Why not have a meeting down there in good company with good friends, in a good organisation, helping the local economy in one part of our great state. It was also said that industry needs to lead, and I could not agree more. It is not about government telling industry what to do. That is a huge mistake. Industry needs to lead the way, but government should be helpful in reducing the barriers. This is what we need to be doing. Reduce the barriers so that industry can take the lead, because it is up to industry to prove the case, to make the market aware of this. But if the barriers are there, such, again, I mentioned this fear of THC, preventing the use of the whole plant, which means that the plant, for whichever use you want it, is no longer economically viable because that part and this part can't be used because of current legislation. That stifles innovation, that stifles the business opportunities, and that is something we ought to be acutely aware of in supporting a hemp industry. And I'm sure that the government, especially with this review of the Select Committee report, is going to be taking this seriously, and I cannot thank them enough for doing that excellent job. Final thing here about the processing. What stops the processing of actually a wonderful crop? What stops the processing is the lack of an ability to sell the product. And a product is not being sold because industry has failed yet to make a case for why we're using this. For example, in pet bedding. For example, in roadside dust suppression measures. For example, in clothing. For example, in making laminates which are stronger than steel and able to make car bodies. For example, using hemp as a substrate for making sustainable, environmentally sustainable hemp batteries, which are, as far as research goes, more effective than the current lithium-ion batteries that we have. Bearing in mind also that battery development is increasing apace, and hemp has a place to play in that development. There is plenty of opportunity for this business, provided government gets out of the way. So I recommend the motion to the House. I'm glad to see support on both sides, and I stand here with thanks to my colleague for introducing this motion, which I hope all will agree.
Question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Lorna Harper.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Sophia Mamon for bringing this motion today, because maybe not in the same way that you're thinking about, but I actually think it shines a light on what the Cook Labour government has been doing with hemp. And like the Leader of the Opposition, I am horrified to be saying on a Thursday morning that I actually agree with a point that he made. And that I believe that with hemp, business is responsible. I know the sky hasn't fallen down. My halo's slipping. But business will decide. This will be driven by business. As has been mentioned, I was on the Select Committee looking into medicinal cannabis and industrial hemp. And has been mentioned that we actually did go on some trips to the southwest, etc., to have a look at industrial hemp and the processes around it. Now, there's some of us in here that managed to taste hemp oil directly from the field. It was basically processed, distilled, whatever it is they do. I can't remember, it was a while ago. And we got to taste that. That was interesting. We got to see the different hemp seeds. We went to places that were, you know, looking at a kind of big barn place that was trying to, you know, produce to make fibres, etc., etc. And I remember them telling us how that there was a difficulty in selling it. And that's when I first agreed, well, if there's no market, why are we making all this? Well, so then, shush. Then,
Honourable shush.
I just love it. Men talking over the top of me. I just love it. As the honourable, you know, it is weird that somebody from my left-wing background would actually agree with that, but it is the case that business will decide. If there is not a market, then how can we be growing it? We also went to a field that was had previously grown a crop of basically low to no THC to be used as industrial hemp. And then what they did was they harvested that, then they just let the field. And what happened is that more hemp just grew. And they were complaining because that they would have to just take this all down and get rid of it. Well, the reason they had to just get rid of this whole field was because it wasn't controlled. It wasn't a controlled crop. Now, that's very clear. To grow hemp, there is control and there's specific seeds that are used to ensure that it is low, the lowest form of THC is involved. But they'd let it go to seed, which meant there was no control. Nobody could know from one plant to the next as to what the THC level is. Now, one thing I have noticed that people do confuse when they're talking about industrial hemp, they do confuse it when they're talking about cannabis and the potential for THC and the stuff that will make you high, basically. That is really, you can't. Because one of the things we did learn is when we're looking at industrial hemp, somebody raised a concern that potentially they could hide recreational drugs crops in amongst. And the producer said, absolutely not. The last thing they want is recreational, the last thing the growers want, who want high THC and put all the chemicals and everything to make it a high THC crop, the last thing they want is an industrial hemp crop anywhere near it because of the cross-pollination, the female plants, the male plants. It's actually very interesting when you go into it, the amount of cannabinoids, the amount of different seed varieties, the amount what you can grow, etc. It's extraordinarily interesting. That is one of the reasons that I like parts of this motion, because it also does talk about what we've looked at in the Select Committee. And we did look very carefully at industrial hemp and sons. And the Honourable Jackie Jeffries has mentioned some of the recommendations and the outcomes of these recommendations. And one of the things, and she was talking about recommendation 14. about the legislation is fit for purpose and does not impose unjustified restrictions on the industry, etc., etc. And they talked about and one of the issues she mentioned was the fact that when we held the hearings, and I can say this because it's in the report, that there were issues raised with DPERB around licences and achieving licences. And as the Honourable Member has mentioned, they were very clunky and they were a bit confusing. So we had conversations with them on more than one occasion, and they listened and they responded really quickly. Since the commencement of the inquiry, in 2021, the licence numbers have dropped from approximately 90 to 59. And there's another 3 licensings will lapse by mid-September. That's not because the costs have gone up, because the licence fee, application fee has stayed the same, and the renewal fee is only about $100. The department has actually now formed an internal working group encompassing regulatory, technical and industry development staff to anticipate and address industry concerns and to drive systemic improvement in relation to policy and regulation. Now, that is a really big positive step forward, and it is really helpful for the sector and for industrial hemp and industrial hemp growers, the ones that want to do the hempcrete and the oil and the fibres, etc., etc. They're undertaking a review of a licence application form, and they're almost there. That was another barrier that was raised about some confusions around this. They reviewed their web pages. They've done everything they possibly can to actually assist hemp growers. But if there is no market, then why would we continue? I mean, we looked at you talked about the carbon and carbon sequestration of hemp. And I believe the Leader of the Opposition was very quite clear when he was talking about why not grow a tree, because it actually takes in more carbon. But also one of the other things is, because when we did some of our trips, some of the information about water, etc., is based on European standards and European reports. Now, somebody that came from a country that was formerly in the European Union, but unfortunately is no longer, I can tell you that the rainfall in that country was on average 300 days a year. The rainfall in WA is on average what? 30, 40, 50 days a year if you're lucky. Down the south, it's not that much. In the southwest of Western Australia, I don't mean up north, it just rains more. So we don't actually have the same conditions to grow the crops in the way they might have in other areas. And that has to be taken into consideration. Also has to be taken into consideration as our farmers struggle. They struggle if we have drought, fires, too much rain, not enough rain, they struggle. The farmers financially, generally, it's a bit of a up and down. It's a boom and bust time for them occasionally. So the farmers have to be very, very cautious and very clear as to when and what they sow. And if hemp is not a crop that is going to make it right for them, is not going to be fine for the soil, is not going to be fine for their profit margin, then they're just not going to do it. To finish up, I am very proud to say that with the recommendations made in the inquiry report, our Minister and our Government are doing as much as they possibly can to support an industry, but it really will be up to the industry to set what they want to go, to find the markets for it to go forward. I believe that as a Government we're doing a lot. I've got nothing against hemp, I've got nothing against hemp oil or the fibres or anything, but find the market, and then carry on. Then we'll see more hemp, not to be confused with the drug stuff.
Question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Pierre Yang.
Thank you, President. I want to start by thanking the Honourable Sophia Momon for bringing this motion to the House. And I want to thank her for her advocacy in this space. I have listened intently for her contribution over the past year or so, and her questions during question time. I want to say that well done on advocating on something that you believe in, and I want to commend you for that. I won't wax lyrical too much, but I want to simply commend the honourable member for her work. Now, Acting President, I want to start by looking at the plant hemp. It is, according to Wikipedia, a botanical class of cannabis sativa cultivars grown specifically for industrial or medical use. It can be used to make a wide range of products. Along with bamboo, hemp is among the fastest growing plant on earth, as we have heard from the Honourable Dr. Steve Thomas talking about it being a fast growing plant. It is also one of the first plants being spun into usable fiber 50,000 years ago. It can be refined into a variety of commercial items, including paper, rope, textiles, clothing, biodegradable plastics, paint, insulation, biofuel, food, and animal feed. Indeed, it has a lot of use. Acting President, according to the Industrial Hemp Act 2004, an act passed by the previous Gallop Labour government, as defined in Section 3, industrial hemp is defined as cannabis and leaves and flowering heads of which do not contain more than 1% of tetrahydrocannabinol. And anything above that would be classified not as industrial hemp, it would be subject to other legislations. And I myself, as I mentioned to the Minister for Agriculture, the Honourable Jackie Jarvis, I have consumed organic hemp seeds previously, and here's a photo of that. They are very tasty. I sometimes mix in my cereal, but I told the Honourable Sophia Momon that I used to eat it as a snack. Very tasty seeds indeed. Acting President, over the past few years, unfortunately the Honourable Yong Sitma is not in the chamber. I had been accused by the Honourable Yong Sitma being an unreliable historian. He is on a number of times. Wow. And I must refuse such incredulous accusation and hyperbole in the strongest sense. Nonetheless, I want to prove that I'm not an unreliable historian. So I will bring us back to the time when the legislation was passed back in 2004. Acting President, you might recall that the Honourable Kim Chance, the former leader of the House, the Minister for Agriculture, was a strong proponent for this legislation, and it was under his leadership that this legislation was passed through the lower house, and the minister moving that in the other place was the Honourable Fran Logan, who I had the pleasure and honour to serve in the 40th Parliament. But in terms of the second reading speech moved by the Honourable Kim Chance, he was actually a strong proponent and supporter for the industry. And he understood that there was a commercial, a community push, rather, by our community, and he strongly supported the industry by facilitating the legislative framework allowing the industry. And at the time, and I quote from the Hansard of the second reading speech, Fran from the Honourable Kim Chance. There has been some debate about the commercial viability of a hemp industry in WA, in Western Australia. Hemp is produced by, among others, less developed countries with very low labour costs and often government subsidies, which obviously puts a Western Australian industry at a comparative disadvantage. Yet the proponents of the industry here are confident of its viability, and the government can find no grounds for standing in their way. And such is was the sentiment of the former Gallop Labor government in support of the community and that push. Now, the acting president, I want to also say this in terms of the bipartisan support for the industry. Acting President, unlike Sir Humphrey Appleby, who in his 30-year or 30-odd year history in public service had to serve 11 different governments, which had polar opposite policies on things like going into the common market or getting out of it, nationalising steel or not nationalising steel, on capital punishment, and other policies. What I can say, Acting President, is that Western Australian governments of all stripes and colours have been supporting the hemp industry. And I think that's one thing that we can be very proud of. Even the Leader of the Opposition was in agreement with the Minister for Agriculture, the Honourable Jackie Jarvis, on a Thursday morning. It's unbelievable development here. Acting President, the Honourable Brian Walker, the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker, chaired the Select Committee into Cannabis and Hemp, and a report was delivered in March this year. Chapter 11 and Chapter 12 were on industrial hemp. I want to thank the Honourable Member and the committee for their work. It's worthwhile reading, very interesting read, and they come up with three important recommendations 14, 15, and 16. And the government equally provided a response, and I want to quickly touch on that. Recommendation 14 raised the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development conduct a review of the Industrial Hemp Act 2004 to ensure the legislation is fit for purpose and does not impose unjustified restrictions on the industry, taking into account of the limited opportunity for industrial hemp to be misused or misdirected. And the government's response is that the recommendation is supported in principle. The next recommendation, recommendation 15, raised the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development should advocate for the Commonwealth Government to amend the Narcotic Drugs Act 1967 and any other relevant legislations which will remove obstacles to the cultivation and commercial use of industrial hemp under the Industrial Hemp Act 2004. Again, the government is advising that this recommendation is supported. The last recommendation of that report, and in relation to industrial hemp, reads the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development and the Western Australian Government continue to encourage and provide financial support for research of the industrial hemp industry. Again, this recommendation is supported in principle by the Western Australian Government. I want to thank the Honourable Sophia Momon for bringing the motion. I also thank the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker for leading that select committee. Very worthwhile. When I also spent a bit of time looking at the so-called missing budget paper, an economic case to legalise cannabis in Western Australia, with an introduction by the Honourable Brian Walker. What I would be interested to see is a similar missing budget paper on the future of the hemp industry in Western Australia. Perhaps I would encourage the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker to look into that for the next budget cycle.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Dan Caddy.
Thank you, Acting President. I just want to start by recognising the honourable member and her honourable colleague for their ongoing advocacy in this area. The government does support the hemp industry, and I haven't got time to go into that. The Honourable Jackie Jarvis, Minister for Agriculture, did that. But we also need to be cognisant of the difficulties and the limitations. And I'm not talking about being negative, I'm just talking about a balanced view. The honourable members usually prosecute their argument on three bases: versatility of the product, economic benefits and the environmental benefits. The versatility of the product, no argument there. There are over 25,000 products worldwide that are produced from hemp, and so there's no argument. But the second and the third tier, the economic benefits and the environmental benefits, are something that we really need to be cognisant of, especially in an Australian context or West Australian context. And I have a few pages here from a pre-feasibility study that was done for the Shire of Manjimup in February in 2018, looking at hemp. And I've chosen a local report, but I want to pick up on a couple of global things that are in here. A couple of points to make. So the number one hemp producer in the world at the time of this report was China. It's a labour-intensive industry. It is highly labour-intensive. And China is the world's, at the time of the report, was the world's single largest hemp producer and exporting country, accounting for about 20% of global production. But the advantage to China is the cheap labour costs and the lack of regulatory burdens on production and processing. And it's important to realise this, that it's those labour costs that make it beneficial for China. And the other country that's often held out as a beacon for the hemp industry is Canada. Indeed, Canada does produce a fair amount of hemp, mainly for hemp seed for that industry. But it's only 1% of the arable land in Canada that's dedicated to hemp. So well, that may be a large number. Canada's a large country. It's not a massive industry by any sense. And this report that I'm referring to says, and I quote, "While there will likely be a small dedicated niche market for hemp fibre in Canada, there is insufficient evidence to suggest that a large market demand will materialise." And I think that's the cornerstone. It goes a little bit to what the Honourable Dr. Steve Thomas was saying. The economic argument needs to stack up before it can become viable. And I just want to go to the environmentally friendly tag, because hemp is often put out there as being more environmentally friendly than other natural and synthetic fibres, and that's kind of the basis of part of the arguments for hemp. But hemp pulp, just fact, is not as profitable as wood pulp, and hemp has more environmental concerns in certain areas. One is water consumption, the other is soil erosion, and the other is soil nutrient depletion. And in Australia, these are critical issues. We don't have the quality of soil of other parts of the world when it comes to nutrients. We certainly don't have the supply to water that other parts of the world have as well. Certainly in the Kimberley, the water's not an issue, but we're talking about growing in the southwest. And soil erosion. Soil erosion's a problem, and it was a problem when I was a teenager on our farm, and it's a problem everywhere. So I do think we need to take this into account. And just quickly, transport is another key issue in WA, and because of the weight per volume of transporting hemp compared to other materials such as wood, this is also a significant environmental cost that isn't factored into a lot of research.